Hey. All right. I tell you what, when I met Rob, I said, let me get this right. You have a group of people who come together that focus on information security, cybersecurity, facility security, and they all like each other and hang out together. He said, yeah, they do. So I'm excited to be here. I want to talk to you a little bit about de-escalation today. My company talks about a few different things that I'll come back to in a minute, but I'm Jerry McCormick. I'm the president of a company called Personal Safety at Work. My path was a little different than maybe you guys in the room. I had a kind of violent upbringing as a child, and then I found myself a police officer wanting to help people. And then in 1999, Columbine High School shooting happened. I was a police officer in Cary, North Carolina at the time, and I decided we're going to do something about not going in. We're going to go in. So in addition, like every other state, training officers how to deal with that, stop the threat, treat the wound, and get them out to a higher level of care, I started researching active shooter events. Now, when I say I researched them, I interviewed shooters in jail. I went to active shooter scenes. I trained about 40,000 first responders in North Carolina. Along the way, though, I got hit by a distracted driver, and I don't know what the words you use. I don't use profanity. It made me angry. So I made that course. But what we found over the years of this is everybody wanted my active shooter research. There's some really interesting factoids which weren't germane today, but they wanted me to talk about that with their company. So I lectured at universities in Europe and China and here in America and went to different corporations. And I finally just stopped one day and I said, this is not what you need. How about I just teach you what an off-duty police officer knows? So I started interviewing cops, and I started interviewing a few hundreds. I couldn't find one to be a victim of a crime away from work, person in person. And to date, just to save you the trouble, I've interviewed 9,969 police officers to date, and I haven't found a single one to be a victim of a crime away from work. And that's what people know me for in the United States in the safety spectrum. What I love about you guys do is because you guys do something that I'm really excited about. When I start talking to these three groups, you guys don't need to be told about risk. I don't have to have a conversation to set the stage that we have threats out there and that we have a good chance of stopping people being victims. And you guys do that every day in your work. And all the technology work you use, no matter which one of these you fall into or what other thing you fall into. So where I found myself a little bit curious here is that I found it, I had to explain kind of where this all comes into play. So when we talk about workplace violence prevention, that's taking all the stuff you guys do and the facility folks do to set up a safe environment for employees. And then I come into places like MetLife, Pendo, you name it, a few different other places, and pharmaceutical companies, schools in China. I've got 7 schools in China that I train. But I take this message around and say, what's a common sense, empowering way to tell people how to keep themselves safe? But then after about 2.5, 3 years ago, I ran into some really odd problems at places. And I found, maybe we should start talking to you about how to deal with de-escalation. De-escalation, what we're going to talk about today, is there's a problem happening right now. You guys probably run, how many people do you walk up to if a laptop doesn't work, the system goes down, they can't get their message out to the client out there because there's some technology glitch, which is not your fault, but you're the one called to try to fix it, or whatever role you play in that process. There's a third course that I might actually do at the conference, we'll see what they say, is conflict, I call it reimagined. I did all this research back to 81, and I found out there's this pervasive nature of conflict in all of our literature and work, and how we can see all these violent incidences that I've researched that they had these trigger points when it was very small, and we have a chance to fix that. So today we're going to stick in the middle and talk about de-escalation. Hopefully you'll find some value in it. So here's the things I'm going to cover. I'm going to set the topic up in just a moment. We're going to talk about some patterns to find in your behavior as your body moves when you're mad, and then as your words come out of your mouth when you're angry. There's a way to talk about that. We're going to talk about bullying in the workplace, which is a shocking problem. Just under a third of the people claim they're bullied at work today. We're going to come back to that one. I'm going to talk about some vendor threats, because every company I've helped, and I've done about, I don't mean this whatever, but I've trained a lot of medical practices over the last 18 months, a little over 250 across the United States. And every single one of them had a vendor harassing an employee inside. I find it in all the companies now too, because now I look for it. But every single one, they had somebody, or they recently had to fire a vendor because they were harassing an employee at work. So we're going to talk about that one as well. I'm going to talk about a couple of different kinds of concepts of anger, and we're going to round it out with some action steps and a top 10 de-escalation tips. Take pictures of whatever on the screen. Doesn't bother me. If something helps you in your work, be glad to. I don't mind it. They're recording it anyway, and apparently you guys got a fairly big network. It's going out anyway. So let's just think about conflict in our lives. It's everywhere. It permeates every part of our society. It does not just at your job, not just where you work every day, not because you and your boss may have a difficult relationship or somehow another way you communicate they don't like. When they have challenges at work, what's that look like? But it also happens in other parts of your life. I want you to just go with this for a moment. Just go with me on it. Could be talking to a family member. We just had a 4th of July. Did you have a big family gathering? Is there somebody in that group that you kind of really didn't want to sit next to at lunch or dinner? I mean, there's some people like that. Maybe it's where you volunteer. Maybe it's this group here. I doubt it, though. You seem like all great people, so probably not. Church. How about how you communicate with others in the community, other places you spend your time? But here's a big one for me. I just want you guys to think about this just for a moment. When we think de-escalation, don't invest in their loss. In other words, when they're spiraling down, they're getting more and more mad, we don't meet them down there. We meet them where we're comfortable and we help bring them out of that situation. In other course, I talk about a rabbit hole. That's not for this purpose, but for visual, that's what we're talking about. There's a company called Collaboration Research. In other words, how we work together well and how we don't work together well. It's a real thing. So we're talking about this here. They say that you spend 2.8 hours a week on conflict. I want you to think about how you just had your last week before 4th of July. You probably had that off. That means that you're spending about $359 billion, another 385 million days of work we're spending talking, and 2.5 weeks a year. When I talk to HR groups, and you're welcome to ask your HR groups this group says that 54% of HR groups, 54% of the week of an HR group is in conflict. Every HR group I talk to goes 85 to 95% of their job is dealing with conflict that's just dropped on their desk. So when we're having this conversation about disagreements happening, we really want to talk about there's some things we can do very intentionally at the end of this conversation today. You're going to have some really good tools to think about some simple tasks you can do to change the conversation. One, we really want positive outcomes. I want a better understanding of others. Because a lot about who we work around is who they are as a person. I talk a little bit differently in another course where we talk about what is your archetype? How do you want to behave and be perceived and be seen in the community? Understanding others, improve solutions, increase team performance. Who doesn't want that? And finally, we all know somebody in your world probably. I know some people in my world. I'm a 30-year retired police officer. So by the way, so I'm retired and been that for about 4 years. And I can tell you, there's a lot of really well-intended cops that I know and different people in the town government that I worked in. They're really great people. But they can make something blow up and just put a little gas on it. They would say, there we go, because how they handle it, it just wasn't effective, no matter how well-intended they were. You're going to hear me say a theme. You're probably going to be annoyed about it because I'm going to tell you something. If you see something out of place, something going wrong, big or small, you saying something about what's going wrong. Because I tell you this, of the 327 cases of active shooter that I researched, every single one had one or more people come forward and say they saw something that told them that person was going to do something wrong. I'm not talking about all the other violent incidents I've investigated and researched. Two things. We want you to say something. If you see it, we want to communicate with others. And I'm going to give you one more quick stat. This isn't an active shooter thing, but if you know the first active shooter event, not my research, happened in 1764 in New England. They shot up a school. 3 guys killed 9 kids, and the headmaster, 2 kids escaped. From that day until today, only one interior door has been breached in an active shooter event and somebody was harmed. So just getting behind a locked door is a really big deal. So when you see something, say something, be able to lock down, it's a really good problem if it gets out of hand. But we don't want it to get out of hand. Some of you guys might want to wonder what's kind of a dangerous thing that you can be working on that might make people more concerned, that might get somebody having an outburst. Usually it's them not being seen by a second person, but Working alone. If you tend to work alone all the time and somebody has a beef with you, that's going to be one of those moments. Working late at night. Nobody does that here, right? Okay, well, oh, there you go. Working in high crime areas. But the next one is one of those little funny things. It's when you're working with people when the perpetrator doesn't think anybody else sees them doing what they're doing. I went up to a company, Michigan, I guess I can say that. I was in a company in Michigan, and there's a guy assaulted his girlfriend at work in the break area and thought nobody saw it. And then somebody from a corner could see it. They went back to work, where his wife worked too, by the way. Anyway, and they went back to work, and finally it was identified, it was talked about, they got the police involved, and they dealt with it. But if a perpetrator doesn't think he can be seen, and I don't care what company you work in, there's a place where you walk down a hall, a break room, a hallway, a stairwell, a bathroom, and somebody wants to be a bully or be mean, there they are. So in the state of conflict, one of the greatest enemies we have in conflict is really us, because we didn't normally start it. Think about how many times people approach you in the job, whatever your role is, and I'm going to use, do you mind if I use IT community? Is that okay? Would you rather cyber community? Which one do you prefer?
You choose.
Rock stars. Oh, we can't say that anymore, can we? Anyway, a lot of times we didn't start it. We're not the reason for it. It's not your issue, but how we respond to what they do is a big deal. And when you start thinking about this as we walk through this journey, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. I have to deal with it because either I'm having to deal with when you're in the IT world, you deal with a lot of stuff that's just crazy. And whenever I think about those areas that are secure and only you can go in there, and it gets kind of crazy. So when we think about that, we want to think about it. But we're going to walk through a couple parts of this. Number one, we're going to do our best to remain calm. Because it's easy, when somebody starts insulting you personally or talking about your work product or what it is, trying to remain calm is really going to be helpful. Some of the key things, we don't want to get upset, where it's only going to escalate the problem, so we want to try to calm down. First part is, before I respond, I'm going to take a deep breath. I want to make sure that I can get myself under control before I do something that might regret. Low tone of your voice. Try not to get defensive. It's an art form. If you were a 30-year police officer, you either gained the art form or you didn't, and you had problems. I gained the art form because I don't get that angry because you're upset with me, because it probably wasn't me that caused the problem in the first place. I talk a lot about situational awareness, and where I want to talk to you guys about this right now, just for the moment, is what are the factors going on around here that are happening in your space that are creating a problem? And as it starts to emerge, what are making those things become a problem when it wasn't your fault in the first place? So I want to talk about instincts. This seems to be, for some reason, when I'm doing corporate trainings in smaller groups, I got 20 or 30 or 40 people in the room, they just don't quite get that idea because they maybe haven't had face those challenges that maybe some of us in the room have had to face over our life. Or I had to learn my instincts pretty quickly because I lived with my mom lived with a violent man, which meant I did. So I learned how to duck pretty good and get out of the room. So I had to learn it pretty quickly. It's kind of a gut instinct, but there's a guy named Sawyer who wrote a book. How many of you guys have heard of a guy named Gavin DeBecker? He wrote a book, Gift of Fear. Great book, by the way. It talks about this, but I like the way Sawyer says it too. He goes, we want to hone, honor, he means trust if you read the stuff he talks about, and we want to listen to it. So it's not a natural instinct if you're not in a threatening or dangerous situation to develop. You got to develop that system to believe if something's really bad, it is. And if it's not, think Chicken Little falling, the sky's falling, versus you're like, I don't know, Clint Eastwood. There's 5 ways intuition speaks to you. I share this because I've had enough people say, well, what do you mean? I don't think it's that big of a deal, but just so where it is, your heart rate increases. It doesn't have to go like really fast. You can just tell you're having a little bit more. You might get a little perspiration. It's kind of that misty. It's not like really you're sweating like you ran a marathon, but a little sweaty. Nausea means like it's just you feel unsettled in your stomach. You feel indecisive. What should I do? Because I haven't faced a situation where somebody's losing their dang mind because their laptop doesn't work, or the system went down for some reason, or they didn't meet their job deadline. And hair on your back, gut feeling's another one. But so we got to understand something. You guys, does everybody pretty much work in big corporations? Is that kind of, okay, anyway, all right, here we go. So what we want to think about is most of the places you work, like this building, are pretty secure. The way they're built, designed, you guys have access control. Most of the buildings you guys work in, if you stay in your building, which is a whole different reason why we need workplace safety training, but low crime numbers don't equal low risk. I'm going to say that again. Low crime numbers don't equal low risk. I was a cop in Cary for 30 years, and my first call in Cary was a house. If anybody know McGregor West, does that sound familiar to anybody in here? There you go. 8,000 square foot house. They just moved in. The guy poured gasoline all over himself in this domestic disturbance. Said he's going to set himself on fire. That was my first call in Cary. And if you don't know, we're the #1 safest city in the country with 100,000 population. But just because you're in that most safe city in the country with 100 population, it doesn't equal no risk. So we're going to kind of roll into a place here where I'm not going to go that deep into it, but I want to kind of talk to you about, you can look at people and their body language and it tells you a lot. We don't have a lot of time for this, so I'll be relatively quick about it. Recognize pre-assaultive indicators. Either they're not actually going to hit you when they're really mad, they're going to do things that are starting to posture like they're going to, even if they don't intend to hit you. But if you can see it, it helps stop attacks, avoids injuries, could prevent death. That sounds extreme. I don't use those extreme words. Like saying everybody says you need active shooter training. No, you don't. You need workplace violence training that in the unlikely event of active shooter. The media's got that one wrong, but let's go on. Don't let truth get in the way of a good story. And there's a variety of behaviors and circumstances that are going to be a cumulative effect when I get done with this section of the presentation, that you recognize there could be some problems you can prevent just knowing is coming. They're called pre-assaultive behaviors. Real big word. It could be a very deep topic. It's a 40-hour class in my world, but we're not doing that. We're going to have a few minutes here. There's 7 pieces we're looking for. How they're behaving. They're going to tell you they're going to do something wrong. Their body language, how they talk, their emotions, facial movement, their physical positioning, how they're moving around you, and psychological clues. This is going to be very high level. So this is a place where I lose people normally. But what I found in the last couple of years is if we're just us hanging out doing this training, and about this room is a good enough size, I want you to imagine a time where you were scared. Think of a time when you had fear. You were at a fight in high school, middle school, you've been engaged in some kind of domestic violence, you've had some kind of threat made to you. I'm going to give everybody a second to kind of recall something. Can pretty much everybody remember something where they felt uncomfortable? Pretty much. I've seen some heads mostly move. Right. So let's go through this and see if you remember that moment and try to tie it to some things I'm talking about. Behaviors. They're aggressive. They threaten you. They're trying to be threatening. Their demeanor, the way they stand, how close they get to you, puffing the chest out kind of thing. They're fight-driven, argumentative. Contempt. A lot of distrust. I don't trust the man, the people, the place, the company, what have you. The hate, hostility, non-compliance. They're just not keeping compliant to what you want to do. And here's one for you. There's 2 of them. Somebody's spitting mad. They're so angry, saliva's coming out of their mouth. Has anybody ever seen that? Okay, I see a lot of heads moving here. Almost always an altercation occurs from that. There's one other I'll come back into a minute, which I don't get either, but we're going to get that one. We're talking about body language. They're blading their body like they want to fight you. Foot goes back. They want to think of boxer stance. We're talking about that fighting stance, what I just said. Clench their fists, like I'm so mad, they're beating their table. Have you ever seen that before? This one I don't get. Dudes do this all the time. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? They're going to get in a fight in high school or whatever. They're going to take their shirt off. I'm like, I don't get the point. But anyway, yeah, that's a good one. Defensive posture, exaggerated movements, stretching. I'm going to do that, so no. Yeah, communication. This is one where nonverbal and verbal gestures. They're doing things. They're making grunts that sound like that. Not too good. Hand signs are sort of that thing like I'm going to do this or pointing at you. Signals. Lack of reference for human life. If you run into somebody who says that, or animals, which is going to come up in just a moment, yeah, you don't want to do that. These pretty well stand out, right? If you see somebody that's angry, they got some despair, their fear, think layoffs. You ever been around the layoffs? Fear, despair, what am I going to do next? Technology boom, they don't lay off in, oh wait, never mind. Sadness, and they're suicidal. You probably in your regular everyday life won't get to the last one, but you could. So I wouldn't really think that was the suicidal one. Your face movements, animated gestures, they want to make sure everybody sees them showing off. This is a physical response we see from people that are angry. The blank stare is like you've lost them in conversation. They're somewhere else in na-na land and they're not with you anymore. In law enforcement, we call that a clue. Clenched jaw. Oh, by the clenched jaw, when you find the clenched jaw in here, if you pay attention, you're in a meeting, you'll see it pretty regularly. They'll sit there in the meeting and they stop talking and they're looking at you kind of and they'll bolt. You'll see this bulge up there. That's right now telling you whatever you're saying right now, they don't agree with. And it's something that most people don't notice they're doing. I hope somebody will text me or email me and tell me they saw it yet tomorrow. Because you'll see if the meeting's not going well, you'll see it. Physical positioning. This is more if you're out and about, you're working on a site, off-site, or you're working, maybe you're off, you're on vacation, you're on a trip, moving to cover, a position of advantage, they're getting around you because they want to rob you, that kind of thing, you don't know. And last one, these psychological clues. Breathing change, elevated pace, sweating. What's going to come very apparent on me that tells you I'm going through this? It's going to be obvious as can be. What's going to be so obvious that I'm going through this process? Who said it? That was it. Say it again.
Red face. Your face is red.
My face will turn red. So these are clues that are going to tell you there's something going on. How can we use it? Now, these are the physical manifestations. Let's take a switch. Let's go to verbal warnings. I've been asked from this by like 10 different companies, like, well, I know when people's being a jerk. They sound like a jerk, they look like a jerk, but really, there might be a little bit more to this. They make a direct threat. In most companies, that's not okay, but they make a direct threat. They make a veiled threat. Well, they make a conditional one. If you do this, I'm going to take my project and go home. I'm going to do that. Boasting your prior violence, if you hear that at work, that's really a problem that we need to talk to somebody about. That might be an HR thing. Confused thinking, that's somebody really, what you'd find, like, if you think about somebody who's dehydrated, we've had this a few times, like we get there and now they've had meds on them, they're dehydrated, and they just kind of seem out of it. That's what we're talking about there. If somebody's bragging about losing control, that is a good clue to you that this is not the place to be, and maybe somebody else needs to be called. I'm going to go with that. And this increased pitch of your voice, when you get really stressed out, and you're really stressed out, your throat constricts, and you start hearing this whining of a voice. And repetitive stuff, which we've all heard when we're kids. I think in workplace it's not as common, particularly not in corporate America. So the strange speech, nervous laughter, there's a lot of cops whenever we're on really serious scenes. You'll see them step aside and they'll make a passing comment and they'll try to break the silence. Small child's hurt. They don't try to do it in front of the family, but to see that every day, somebody being hurt, just tough to watch. But nervous laughter, so it's really out of place. And you act like that when you're talking about your kids, if you have kids and you're talking to somebody else about them and they're standing right there, that's what I'm talking about when they say that, when they're not present. Yelling or screaming clearly isn't okay. Nonstop profanity, you probably have somebody in your network that cusses more than others. Not my thing, but hey, you might have that. But if they start using it particularly when it's not okay or it's not where it should be, then that's a whole different thing. I say to Slur Beach, that hurting the animals at the last one, I want to tell you, if you find somebody in your network at all that says they hurt animals and it's joyous, I'm not talking about hunting for deer or whatever, bird hunting, whatever. You're not doing that to try to hurt the animal, but that's not the goal there. But yeah, that should be a clue. Again, so we've seen the physical manifestations. I kind of ran through them, but all these signs you tell something's wrong. And then now we want to assess what's going on, because now we're seeing the physical manifestation. We saw the verbal clues. I kind of got to some of those. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. And now we want to figure out what's the situation. Why is this person so upset? Driving down the road, you're in your car, and somebody comes up and starts yelling at you. I mean, you're kind of 10 and 2, you got the cruise control on, don't know what that person's bad day is, that kind of thing. What's going on? Why is this person mad at me? Before I get a little fast there, sorry about that. I want to give you some context on what I'm talking about. How do you evaluate somebody that's behaving in a way that gives you clues they're up to no good? So everybody here, I'm just going to assume has been on a plane the last year, 2 or 3. I'm just going to go with that. In this room, you guys are tech people. Here we are. So what you may notice when you're getting off the plane, You know, the pilot's opening his door, finally, flight attendants leaning on the bulkhead of the wall, hanging out, they're looking like this, and they're talking about what's up, hey, thank you for flying, appreciate you, what is. When you walk in, that's not what they're doing. If you notice, somebody's usually standing there and they're like this, hey, how you doing, welcome, welcome. They're looking for 5 things. Did you know that? Here's the 5 things they're looking for. Can you help me if I've got to restrain a passenger or pick a bag up? Number 2, are you drunk, alcohol, whatever? Are you on drugs, something? Are you messed up? Number 3, do you need a little help? You know when they announce when you're waiting and you bought a ticket to get in front of everybody else and they go families, whatever, whatever, and if you need a little extra time, that's what they're talking about because they don't want to delay the flight. Finally, are you scared of flying? You walk in and you're already talking about, has this plane crashed lately kind of thing. Like, And finally, large carry-ons. And you think no further, for you guys that live in remote areas, you take a big plane to an airport and it lands, and you got to take a smaller plane and you go and you land a commuter plane. Everybody know with me? What are they doing at the front door? You didn't even walk in the darn plane. They're like, boom. You haven't got a choice because it's not going to fit in the overhead. So how can you use this for your team? If you have an IT support staff, you have some administrative folks in the front of your office, when those vendors, other people, outside people are coming in, how can we check in where they are today and how they feel and what's going on? How can they do that and make it meaningful to somebody? We want to start doing some analyze. I want you to think about yourself in the conversation because you help set the mood. You help set the mood no matter if you brought the problem or not. The other person's and then tactics. So the first one, what are you feeling when this person creates this problem for you? I'm just going to go with you're not the problem. You guys look like beautiful people. Not going to be an issue. I get it, I guess. What's your body language tell them? Are you saying forget you? Or are you going like, keep wanting to shoot a laser there. What's your tone of your voice? What kind of words are you using? Here's the other person. Listen to what they're saying. What is they're saying? Their words, manner, how they say it is telling you really about where they are in this conversation, particularly if they're upset. How they're standing, what's their posturing, their body language like? What's the tone they're using? What are their words they're using? And as you look at the situation, what do you think they're feeling? Because now you're going to kind of try to meet them where they are in terms of not getting in the hole with them, but trying to say, okay, this person, look, you just look really upset. What's going on? Let me talk to you about that. And go from there. But do something, act and do something, say something, tell a fellow report, see something, say something, wait for it. Anyway, start by telling somebody else. There's a concept out here that when people are up to no good, they're just going to tell you. I was in this C-suite conversation. Most of the executive team wanted to hire me to come in and do corporate training to this fairly large company. CEO was totally against it. And he walked up to me. He's like, stood up and goes, what? Do you mind if I point at you? What would you do if they put a gun in your face? I said, sir, I wouldn't be there because they gave you a million clues. No one just walks up and puts a gun in your face. That's not the way life works. So they told you a million things around you should have picked up on to see that. And after this class, hopefully you do. Body language. Wait, there's a theme here, right? Verbal clues. Combination of body and verbal, for sure. Past behavior. If it's an employee that always blows up, or somebody in your friend group, or somebody where you play sports or basketball or volunteer or community, whatever, what's that like? So I want to talk about signs of workplace problems. And so the violence at workplace is confusing, and I'm going to go ahead and say it. Some of your friends, they act silly. They say the wrong thing. They're going to meet some of these criteria. Well, I am not telling you in any way your friends are not going to do workplace violence necessarily, but it's one factor that tells you they're always going to be a problem when you talk to them. So we want to recognize the signs because we want to stop small incidents before it becomes a major incident. Get that small incident. We want to get that done. We want to. It may escalate to physical or psychological. We want to get this small inappropriate behavior addressed. They want to change their behavior. So how can we do that? Take note of that bad behavior and say something. And see its concern before it happens. We want to see it coming and then try to talk to the person about that. In any event, so here we go. Some of the things you might, I don't know about fascinated with violence incidents. Threatening behavior, holds a grudge. Do we know anybody like that? Impulsive, easy to get frustrated. Know anybody like that? Because one of us is going to fall in one of these categories. Family problems, divorce, child custody, sick parent, sick child, something like that. They're already stressed out. This is one you probably don't know anybody like this. They're entitled, blames others, self-esteem. Nobody knows somebody like that. Irrational beliefs. Few families are friends. Is that bad or good? I don't know. If they have no friends because they're antisocial, maybe a little bit more of a challenge. Never happy, overreacts to negative feedback, blows things out of proportion. Somebody likes to argue. Their impulse control is kind of limited. They're irresponsible. They don't take responsibility for their behavior, their mistakes. It's always someone else's fault. Frequent absences. This is tied to substance abuse, but if you have somebody in your work environment that uses up all their days off, how you guys bank the days, if they use up all their days off right away, they're always calling out sick, they're going to have to go home sick early, it may not be substance abuse, but it's a clue that something's going on. There's another problem going on. Now, I'm not talking about FMLA. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about they're legitimately, there's no clue why they're doing it, but they're just never at work. I'm going to talk about bullying in the workplace real quick. There is actually a thing called the Bully Institute. I didn't know either until about 2.5 years ago. Bullying in the workforce is actually much more common than I ever thought. So about 2 years ago, we started including it. A few things we want to talk about it. Leading workplace stressor, individuals, it hurts groups, it hurts the whole organization. The problem is, here we go, wait, look at that red word right there. Creates frequent absenteeism. That's another way you can tell they're not having a good time at work because they frequently miss meetings. They don't get there on time or they get there late. They've been bullied. They have these 3 factors that are pretty common. They're low level of satisfaction, anxiety and depression, and they're more likely to leave work. And you're going to say, I want you to just think for a second that somebody's pushing somebody around, the way they talked about the work product, the way they threaten behavior. This is what we're talking about. Here's some numbers I found that were just really surprising. 30% of people say they're bullied at work. 78 million people. The number of that is 61% are same-sex people. And on the one that just kills me, 43% of people who work virtually say they're bullied. There's a conversation that's much longer. You're going to hear that. I'll be glad to have it with you. I don't have time during this presentation, but it's just something to think about. I want to give you context to my research. I'm going to go back to active shooter just for a minute, just to tell you what I want to tell you. So I've researched 327 cases of active shooter. Every single one of them said they were taunted or bullied. That was part of their reasoning for doing the shooting. Now, I'm not saying it's very uncommon, actually. You're actually more likely to win the Mega Million or Powerball lottery to actually be active shooter, not gang violence, not drug violence. I'm talking about active shooter. But still, they listed one of their factors. So this is, I thought, was the guy that was, you remember the shooter that shot up Walmart in Virginia? It was about a little over a year ago. He claimed that he was being mocked and harassed. And in his message, in his manifesto on his phone, but in that message on his phone, I'm going to kill all these people, but I'm not going to kill those because they didn't mock me. They didn't do that. This guy, I happen to know somebody directly involved in this one. This is Highland Park. They showed it on the news quite a bit. It happened July 4th last year. And this kid who was a tough kid in the town, problematic, his family was as well. When he was interviewed by the FBI, he said, "We noticed you didn't shoot the firemen. You went behind because they were always nice to me." Just something to think about. I don't know, man. What if things do get out of control? Reporting workplace violence. Do you have a system currently at your office if somebody's being violent at work, they're being abusive at work, and you report it? There probably is a system. Most of it don't talk about because we almost always think it's unusual behavior. But what I'll go back to again, what I've been kind of emphasizing here, almost always somebody saw the behavior ahead of time. So just saying something if you see it. If we just get involved a little bit earlier and say something to somebody, we can hopefully help it. I would say the employees are obligated. You don't want workplace violence? You don't want that? Then say something you see something out of place. I'm going to talk real quick about vendors here. This is something that I have been shocked at, that like I said, virtually every medical practice I went to, a little over 250 in the United States, had somebody that was currently being harassed by a vendor and their boss didn't even know it, or they caught somebody doing something inappropriate, being too close. Sally has to get this package. He delivers the package, or she does, sits on the desk, gets too close, says inappropriate things to them, sends them notes, that kind of thing. So if you have vendors that come to where you work, if you have that, build a good relationship with them, because once they start behaving poorly, we're going to have to address it. We want to say that we want to be comfortable to work together, because, but things do happen, we want to support each other. But when you're not happy, there needs to be a system on to deal with that. And I encourage you, when you go back to your office, ask somebody if you have administrative staff that see the vendors that drop things off, new computers, new cables, whatever widgets you need to do your job, ask them if they're having a problem. And just kind of we want to set a tone with them, say what's okay to do. We want to practice good leadership and say we want it to work for our family. I'm telling you, if you go back and check, you're going to find this is the case. In fact, I've only had one in my last probably 9 months. They didn't have somebody that was actively doing something wrong. Who do you tell? Supervisor for sure, right? We want to be clear and helpful. Really, we don't want to pass judgment. We wanted you to do this, but you did that. And all the medical practices I help, the vendors now have to all go to a door. And a door has a doorbell on it. And the door is locked. And we push a button, because when you do really good security, you guys think about what you guys do in the cybersecurity, IT security, and physical security of a building. If you tell people where you want them to go, and ostensibly tell them where you don't want them to go, if they go where they're supposed to go, they're going to get great customer service, because you're waiting there to serve them. If they don't go where they're supposed to go, they should stand out, and in that case, we can do something about that. We don't want to interpret what happened. You didn't do what I asked you to do. We don't want to make assumptions. We want to just stick to the facts. You did this, and you didn't do what we needed you to do. And basically, we don't want to make it personal. We just need you to do your job so we can do our job and serve our community. And I'm just going to go real quick through this just so you guys see it. Point out the problem. You might need a new procedure. Like I said, in most medical practices, they don't go through the front door anymore. They go to the side door. There's a doorbell. There's a way to do it. We just set that clear. And if you can't resolve it, then maybe your boss can. So we're going to talk about types of anger real quick here. We're kind of winding a little bit down in our time, maybe about 14 or 15 minutes left. And I want to talk about types of anger. There's the personal-based angers, because when they're personally angry, it's probably not about you. And if it is, it's an over-exaggerated anger. Displaced anger, content-based anger, and some tips around it. Displaced anger. They were mad when they got there. They got out of bed that morning bad. They got off on the wrong side of the bed, had a fight with their spouse, walked in, road rage, wanted to tell you a bad story about something bad that happened in their family. It's not directed at you. You ever heard that before? It might have been in a relationship ending. But if you heard that line, it's not you, it's me. That's what we're talking about. They're angry about something else, though. Displaced, they're angry about something small, inconsequential, they can try to identify to get you. Nonverbal indicators of what they're already observed. You've already seen this person walk in and not being happy well before it started. We really don't want to try to interrupt. When they come in with that minor issue that makes a big issue because they're already angry, let's just try not to interrupt. Redirect them, a vendor or the person in front of you. I can see you're frustrated. Try to have a conversation. We're going to let them talk a little bit, but this isn't a 3-hour conversation. Hey, I see you're upset. Great. Thanks for that 1-minute explanation of what went on. If you really care about them and their value as a relationship, maybe a little longer, but ultimately we pretty much need to get back to work. The other kind is when things didn't go the way they were planned. It's not like you really meant to mess up. The product didn't get there in time. The project went over. Something was messed up. A formula didn't work. Whatever, the widget didn't get installed in time. The easiest thing, this is really easy to diffuse. Okay, not be defensive. What can I address right now to try to solve this? And that's it. At the end of the day, don't make excuses. Just, if you were part of the problem, accept that and just move to the next step. So if we're really talking about an angry person, challenging, threatening, or doing something to other people, we really want to avoid that criticism. It's really easy to go, dude, whoa, stop what you're doing. And just that really strong reaction base, it's really easy to do that. But we want to think about how we want to de-escalate that situation. Starts with us being calmer. If they start venting going too far, that's where we're going to bring it to a stop. I want to take a step back here for a second. So when I talk about people intervening and trying to handle situations right, it's really what we understand is we have to recognize what it is. I don't want you to not doubt yourself. If something's wrong and they're making you scared, you should listen to that. But in the end, you know, if it's not violence, most situations are solved with, hey man, knock that off. Get back to work. If you ever had somebody in your work, I had one of my earlier supervisors was a cop. He was really good, like looking and going, knock that off. Just let's not do that anymore, and it was just over. So there you are. But we got to balance the likelihood of something going wrong and us overreacting to it. Because if we can't distinguish that, that's a problem. If you're in doubt with what you should do next, just find some other employee to engage with, or move yourself to a different situation so you can be away from the problem. In the end, we don't want to put us in jeopardy for doing something too much. You know, if you find yourself getting ready to do something, this is just a caveat I feel like I'm obligated to give. Your job is not to fight somebody. You're in cybersecurity, IT, facility security. Anybody here in security, actually, your job is to, even the corporate security guys I know can't actually put their hands on people. Maybe yours is different, but the ones I've been around in pretty major corporations can't actually touch somebody. So what if things aren't going well? What should we be doing about that? If you feel unsafe, you should leave. Make sure you're okay. Make sure you're safe. How many of, I'm curious because I ask this about every audience I have. How many of you guys have ever called 911? Oh, thank God, finally. Because in Cary, we have like 10,000 calls a month, and I met a handful of people that actually called them. I want to tell you, if it does get so out of hand that you have to call 911, let me give you a couple of points they're going to ask you and why, just so you know, it's how you speak to 911. They're going to ask for your address. Whenever the person who answers the phone, they say, 911, where's your emergency? They have a headset on. And to their right is a fire person with the same headset on. To their left is an emergency medical person, has the same headset on. So they can start rolling things to you. So if you're calling for a medical emergency, which is why most people call, traffic wreck, something like that, you can do it. They're going to ask for your address first so they can get the asset rolling towards you. They're going to ask you to spell the address or the name or where you're generally at in the street if you have an accident. But you know, when you have these problems, just follow their lead on how to handle it. But your biggest asset is having somebody with you, because bad guys do not like witnesses. They don't want to get somebody else to get a, and if you have cameras and witnesses, and you got audio, cameras, and witnesses, your chances of having somebody act out are kind of going to be pretty low. So we're going to talk about just some de-escalation techniques. So the first part we're doing today is we're preparing. That's the first start. We know the problems are verbal and nonverbal. We have some signs of a conflict. Remember, we go back to this. This is intentional. I'm going back to this. Body language, big deal. Conversation tone, big deal. They're pacing or fidgeting. They're going back and forth, big deal. Yelling, of course, bullying, actively not following the rules. Your job in this whole situation is to appear calm. The very best you can do is try to maintain eye contact, because first, this is what you want to do. These are the simple, to the point. We're getting towards the end here. Stay calm, maintain eye contact, but don't stare. Nobody likes somebody doing like a bull gaze, and don't let your eyes off of them. Create a little bit of space. If somebody's over there, I might step this side of the podium. I just might. Encourage a person to be seated. This is a very good de-escalation technique. But if they don't sit down, you don't sit down. You want to remain eye level with them. Second, we want to maintain a neutral face, a neutral expression. Try not to be judgmental of that. Just like, I don't want to be here to deal with this anyway. Let me not make it worse. I'm going to put my hands in front of my body. I was doing this talk in Cherokee a couple weeks back. And this guy came up to me, in martial arts, and I mean, dude had like a storied history, kind of a cool story. We put our hands and we do, stop it. If you're Kung Fu, that's great. If you're martial arts, if you put your hands in front of your body and somebody runs towards you, you can kind of block them off if you're trying to get a space. It's not something that's likely, but if they do, you want to be able to defend yourself. Not do anything to them, but just stop them from doing something to you, push them away. And do not shrug your shoulders. That is immediate. When you do this, like you're like, That's really telling that. There's a lot of studies out there about this, and usually you could probably think of one or two words that might be associated with doing this to somebody. I'll leave you to that, but don't shrug your shoulders. And 3, we don't point fingers at people. Even when I said, do you mind if I point at you, you see me do that? That's why, because it's offensive when people point at you. Unless they're saying, hey, can you be on my team? And that might be okay, but pretty much everywhere else, not so much. We don't want a lot of fidgeting. We want to stay calm, because the more we stay calm and our voice is lower, it's going to help them stay calm. We want to do space. I'm always showing you this because if you ever go to another de-escalation class, there's those concepts out there that we have to be 12 feet apart from the person we're having a dispute with. Think about how many rooms you can be in where you can be 12 feet apart from somebody. But I say that, and I usually, if in corporate trainings, I got a tape measure. Have somebody hold it, and I'm like, okay, now remain calm. No, we don't do that. But I'll just show it to you because in case you hear it, it's whatever the comfortable space is. But the more upset they are, if there's a table in the room, I want to be on the other side of the table if they're really that frustrated. Okay. So here's what we're doing, real simple. So if you don't have a reporting mechanism in your company, I hope you do, but if you don't, and if you're not sure, you should talk to somebody, just say, we had this question we should ask. See the issue. The next one, is it still going on? Yes, I probably need to tell somebody, right? Next, how do we deal with this issue? You have security on campus calling them, bringing attention to somebody else so we can engage them. What if no? But the situation is bad enough. They were assaulted. Somebody hit somebody. Somebody did something bad at work. We want to tell somebody, at least your supervisor, probably HR, somebody, tell somebody. Because again, if they did it today to somebody else, they could do it another day to you. Don't think of it like it's not, well, it didn't happen to me, so it doesn't matter. Who's going to deal with it? It may not be you, by the way. And that's fine if it is. But if I'm really good friends with a guy, and I've done this before, non-law enforcement, guys started getting upset, and I said, I got this. Hang on, I'm going to take care of it. You need to calm down, take control. I've done that before, but generally speaking, who's going to be the person dealing with it? And if you don't have procedures to how you're just having a conversation with your coworkers, isn't a bad way to deal with that. So where are you going to deal with it? If you're a boss in here and you have an office, don't bring problems to your office. You can have conversations, whatever, but we don't counsel people in our work office. Here's why. Guess where they're going to look for you if they got a problem? In your work office. Time and time again, counsel, we don't do that. And what's your plan? And then finally, what are next steps and how are you going to report it? There's got to be a way to do it in your system. It's probably not that complicated. Just tell an HR, and I have a feeling that's going to take care of it, but there we go. We're going to shift to the future now. Now, some people kind of get this one and they kind of laugh at it, but shift to the future might be, what's your name, sir? Sam. Hey, Sam, sorry you had a bad day. I'll be glad to talk to you after lunch. No problem. Could be, hey, Bob, yeah, you're on the edge right now. You still have a job, but if you keep that up, I'm going to create hope. You can still have a job, but you need to stop. We'll take a break. We'll come back and talk about this later. And it could be somebody, a vendor, somebody's on your property, somebody's acting a fool. You're like, listen, you keep this up, we're going to call the police. What they're going to do when they get here, I don't know. But you don't want to find out. So just leave the property and stop. Creating hope is really about what's the hope to them. All right. Wait for it. Shocking. I know. Now I have a quiz for you guys. Now this is going to be a toughie. I've got the top 10 de-escalation tips for you fellas and ladies. Anybody want to hazard a guess at number 1? Anybody? Bueller? Anybody? No, close. Where is it? 1, 2. Everybody heard it? 1, 2, 3. If you. Come on, bigger than that. 1, 2, 3. If you. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Wow, shock. Number 2, trust your intuition. You have it. It's inside you. Freud said your id, the core of your person, is safety. You have this in you. It's built in you. Trust your instincts. First, calm yourself. You're the first. The problem came to you probably. You didn't bring the problem to somebody else. So let's take care of ourselves. Remember verbal and nonverbal school? We got some really, pre-assault behaviors and pre-verbal behaviors to tell you something's going on. There we are, pre-assault behaviors. The golden rule. This is a toughie, isn't it? How do you want to be treated? How would you like your husband, wife, brother, sister, cousin, mom, dad, whatever, grandparents to be treated? That's how I try to treat people. And how you talk to them is a big deal. There's in the other course I do, it's allowing them to have a conversation. In other words, they just got what was bothering them off their chest or whatever. You gave them a chance to do that. That right there is going to do it. And of my active shooters, of the ones who were in that category, 9 out of 10 said they weren't allowed to finish their statement. We just came up, no, here's the solution, get back to work. And that's what they did. And then they did something else. You want to be considerate, but you also want to be clear and helpful. It's not okay to go, well, we'll see. This probably, I don't know if this is going to be a problem or not. You knocked the fool out of somebody at work. That's probably not going to go well. You probably won't have a job. But I'm not going to say that. I'm just like, I don't make that decision, but we need to do something. We don't want to try to make it personal or try to interpret what they're doing. And finally, we want to try to offer concrete solutions to go forward and know when to let it go. So we had a whirlwind experience there. I think I'm right at 46 minutes or something like that. So what's this? What questions do you guys have? Was there something in your work environment you've experienced, you've seen, handle, experience? Anybody? I heard this is a great group of great questions. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to put anything out there, but yes, ma'am.
Okay, I don't know if this is a great question, but the thing that occurs to me when you're talking is there are so many people, particularly in leadership, who are averse to conflict. Mm-hmm. And so when you raise something, and I'm thinking about the school shooters, right? So teachers might raise something, or kids might raise something saying, trench coat over there, it's got a little problem.
Yeah.
And no one wants to deal with it. As recently as there was an incident where a student in the primary school came to school with a gun, shot the teacher. Now, earlier that day, the teacher had raised it with the principal and said something, and she got shot at the end of that day. So I guess one of the things with see something, say something, and so on is how do you deal with this aversion to dealing with the issue?
Yeah, everybody heard all that? Basically, they said something, no one did something. So the thing about that is becoming far and far less common for two reasons. Number one, it's just so now, if something's going to happen in school, I got to say something, and it's becoming much more litigious. The lawsuits are astronomical in these incidents of those whenever they knew something ahead of time and didn't do it. They didn't search the backpack of the kid, whatever else the person did. So number one's that. I would say the other part of it is that we as a society, I'm going to say something. If you don't do something, that's you. I don't want it on my conscience I didn't know. And I think the more I feel like in my training, when I walk out the door, and I could be dead wrong, so don't hear no arrogance from this, but I tell the CEO, the C-suite behind the scene, I'm going to say this in public. Here's the things, here's the limitations you have with your facility. Here's the things I think I would add. And then I'm going to put the things in. I know they're not going to bulk out because I want the employees to have a problem. But in the end, I tell them, don't hire me if you don't want me to tell them to speak up, because I'm going to tell them to speak up. So that's a great point. All right, I saw somebody back there with a hand. Anybody else? Want to throw something out? Have some fun? I'm almost done. Seconds. Yes.
Minor correction on that case. That was a Newport News school district. My son-in-law used to teach in that school district at middle school, next level up. They did search the bag. He was ahead of them and had moved the
Yep.
gun to his jacket by that time. So
I was talking about the Michigan shooter, the kid that was in high school. They didn't search his bag, and the parents had bought it for him and given it to him and knew he took it to school. But thank you very much for that.
dealing in product security, I do the same sort of thing. One of the worst problems I have is people with hubris and bias, and they don't see it because every day we have to have a certain amount of that, or we can't function. Like we're driving a car, we expect people are not going to come across the double yellow line, right? We don't have a mechanism to actually really stop them from doing that. We assume that, and the same thing happened there. And it's going to always impact us. We need to figure out when we stop following the bias and branch off into something that's more reasonable for the situation.
I think the thing that we want to hear, though, is that these are the outliers. If you want to come to another talk of mine, we'll see if it comes up at the conference, but we can talk specifically about the actual number of violence in schools compared to what is being reported and how it's reported. Like if a shooting is within 100 yards of the school, it happened at the school. You guys probably knew that, right? Yeah, that's how I report that. If it's gang violence, if it's drug violence, or if it's organized crime, it's not active shooter. So all the gang violence in Chicago, Compton, all these other places where we have a lot of rampant crime, we need to fix. So there's some stats out there that are really misleading. Mass killings and mass shootings, 4 and 4. But anyway, happy to talk about that. If we don't have any other questions, going once, going twice. Thank you very much. I'm Jerry McCormick.